And again, thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon for the Western Connecticut UFO conference. And we have Thom Reed, who will be our guest today, and he will be talking about his Berkshires UFO incident. And he also has a special guest with us. So Thom, thank you
Yeah,
for joining us, man.
absolutely, man. Thanks for having me. It's yeah, this is great. It's home to me, it's where I
Thank
grew
you.
up. Yeah. And I used to go to the Marcus Dairy in Danbury as a kid growing up. I used to take my motorcycle up there. So this is kind of,
Did you
there's a lot.
actually go to the Danbury Fair when it was?
No, I didn't. No.
And I think that happened in the fall, and
Okay.
it was kind of like the precursor to the Big E. So,
Oh, the Big E
so it was a precursor to the Big E.
in
So
Springfield.
basically, after the Danbury Fair
Right.
folded, the Big E kind of took off and everything. So, but now there's a Danbury Fair, so you get to see that.
All right. Well, I'll be up there in the spring.
Awesome.
Anyway, so yeah, so I've got Elizabeth Michael with me. She runs is the head of the Roswell Convention Center, and she also is very active in putting together the Roswell Festival every July. And so she works, with the city and everything like that. And since it's now been adopted, if you will, as a second event, and in Roswell, along with some others, but it's kind of embraced now. And one of the things I want to talk about later on before we get too far off, and I don't talk about this a lot, that the investigation that took place with the Historical Society and so on in, back in the 2013, 14, and 15, before it was inducted into state as an historically true event, our lawyer, a law firm by the name of Kessler Law Firm, worked with the research center at the Roswell Museum. And following that investigation, after it was inducted, the Roswell Daily Record, the newspaper, actually interviewed Debbie Oberman, the director of the Historical Society. And that's kind of how this whole Roswell connection came to be, is that they worked with the state of Massachusetts to validate and verify a lot of this information that was later put forth to a census to see if there was enough here to deem it historically true. And so it was gracious enough that she was able to help us today or join us. With that, I just want to make sure my levels are okay. Okay. So I guess what I'll like to do is kind of start with what happened, because there is a lot of information floating around in newspapers and articles, and writers take their own spin on things. It was actually there were three incidents that took place. There was one in 1966. There was one in 1967, which actually made the newspapers, involving our family. And there was that third one in 1969. 1967 was when we fell under so much scrutiny. We had seen an awful lot in the area, talked about it openly in our family's diner. And a lot of the locals kind of turned on us a little bit, they're crazy, that kind of thing. And it wasn't until 1969 when so many other people saw it, and I believe it was about 250 people. And, it went out on WSBS radio, which is still in Great Barrington to this day. And it was witnessed by an awful lot of kids in the area. The reason so many saw it was because it was a holiday. And there were an awful lot of people outside, barbecues, events within the community, the town. There was a 4-H horse show at Ski Butternut at the time. There were witnesses from there, and there were also witnesses from the Jug Inn Resort, where our case actually got its first HINET classification, or CE1 classification at the time. Tom J., who was with the radio station, after getting these reports and hearing them over a ham radio, left his home, having dinner with his wife, to go down to the WSBS radio, open up the lines, because at that point it was just kind of running. It was like pre-recorded, a reel-to-reel type of thing, and broke into the radio station, or the radio, it was kind of a talk radio, but was asking for people to call the station to let him know where this craft was that was being seen, throughout Sheffield, really. And one of the things that Unsolved Mysteries did that wasn't really fair was that they actually interviewed the Great Barrington Police Department, and had them open up their books to see what took place that day, when in fact there was no reports in Great Barrington. The UFO was actually in Sheffield. Now, people had seen a couple people like, there was a few that have jumped on the bandwagon, but Melanie for sure was involved in it, Melanie Kirchdorfer, but they never reported it. So the only reports that were coming in were over Sheffield. And that's why if you watch Unsolved Mysteries again, the Berkshires UFO episode, you'll see Galata points to his father on the ceiling or a poster, if you will, and says, yeah, we went out, we were getting reports about it landing in fields because it took place in Sheffield. The sightings that were reported were in Sheffield, not Great Barrington. And Unsolved knew that. They also left out all the documentation. And I don't think that was fair because they contacted me because it made history and they wanted to know what really was it. So to give you an idea, before I tell you exactly what happened, that our restaurant or diner, if you will, that's still there today, it's Roberto's now. One of the reasons we had so much interest and there were so many people involved in this is that my mother used to run a tab for the children in town. And with that, those people, those kids back in the day became bankers, historians, a judge. And so they remembered it. Now, another reason that our diner became so important in all this was that when it happened in 1969, it was 6 weeks after we landed on the moon. And those that worked at Sprague Electric and General Electric and those manufacturing facilities that were funded by NASA and our government to beat Russia to space, a lot of them would eat in our diner. The people that actually manufactured the goodwill message, the engineers who formed that message that was left on the moon, would eat in our diner because we were down the road from the horse track. And so they would come in, have a bite at our diner, and go to the Great Barrington racetrack. And so there's an awful lot that never gets mentioned. My father was a politician. He was an attorney. He took it before the United Nations on October 2nd, 1992, and subsequently lost his life on that anniversary. So this was all part of why there was so much attention to our incident. But if you watch Unsolved Mysteries, there's none of this. And so we were a little upset with it, to be honest with you, but it still brought attention to it. So with that day I was at the 4-H horse show in Great Barrington, and I was in a competition, and we left kind of early. It was super hot, and we headed back to the diner to just let our cook go, make the night deposit box, drop, put the money in there, clean it up for the morning and that kind of thing. And so about 8:30 or so, we were wrapping it up and heading home and heading through the Sheffield covered bridge. Now, when we first entered the bridge, my grandmother had noticed that the amount of light coming through the planks or what have you didn't seem to make sense with just our headlights. But at the time, who cared, right? I mean, it was whatever. But by the time we came out of the bridge, my grandmother had turned around to look at us because I was giving my brother candy. She never forgot that. And when she did, she looked out the back of the station wagon and she saw this white sphere that looked, to describe it the best I can, was that it looked like a cue ball from a pool table. It wasn't bleeding light. It didn't, it was like a 2-watt bulb that was very crisp and self-contained. And it started to rise from the banks of the Housatonic River. We never said it came out of the water. We just saw it rise from the banks. It was already up off the water when we saw it. My brother on the right of me was looking out the right window too. He's trying to look around me and everything else. And he looked out the window to his right and saw an orange, I guess I'd call it a sphere, which was very much like the white one we just saw, but it was like an orange or a red and it swirled. And I mentioned it looked like an ocean wave, the way it was turning on the inside, whereas the white one was not. And the white one was much bigger. It was like 3 to 4 times the size of a Volkswagen Beetle. The one on the right was about the size of a Beetle. We had a Volkswagen Beetle. shortly afterwards. So we use that as kind of a way to describe the size of it. The one to the right stayed near the water, right around the bend where the park is, and the one to the left rose. So we drove between those going down the road, and when we got to a telephone pole, which is still there to this day, there was a spot to the right where trucks or whatever, maybe they were working on it at one point, but there was a little bit of a place where my mother could pull off a little bit, and she did. And off to the right, there was a left, there was a clearing. Now, we were looking for this white sphere to see, get a better look at it. What is that? But because we had seen things before, we weren't a novice to activity in the area. So we were looking for that sphere when my mother saw first this large disc-shaped object hovering, maybe 2 to 3 stories off the ground, and it was huge. Now, we had said that it lit up a little bit, it had a light to it, but it didn't have like floodlights, it didn't have lights shining down onto the ground or anything. The shell itself emitted a light itself. So it kind of had almost like, I don't want to say a glow, but it had a sheen to it. And oddly enough, hang on one sec. And so with that, it had what that was silver and like a gold tint to it. It wasn't one solid color. It had different tones. And the right side was much more illuminated than the left. And so while I was sitting there, I'm looking out the window, my mom's looking out the window, and it was just, it was huge. And what I remember the most about it was at the center of it was very fat. So the top was narrow, the middle was very fat, and then the bottom was narrow again. So it was, the larger part of it was the center, and it had lines in it like a kind of like a snakeskin, I guess. It wasn't, it had, I got a picture of it. I think I sent you, if you can put that up. I don't know if you're able to do that.
Give me a moment. I'm going to try to do it.
Okay. And so this is a depiction, if you can get it up, of how we described it, how it looked to us. And it's pretty accurate. I don't think the middle is quite as heavy as it should be. But so this thing was probably, I'm going to say at least 100 yards. Now, I was young, impressionable. I used to think to myself, well, maybe it wasn't quite as big as I remember it. But we've gone back, numerous times, and it was at least 100 yards. And then when we spoke with, the Jan Green from Unsolved Mysteries, she kind of worded it the same way. It was huge. And when she saw it, she was so close to it that she couldn't even see the end, she said. So it was quite large, and there's still trees there to this day that kind of mark where it was. So this thing was at least 100 yards. Again, no lights coming down from the bottom, no windows, nothing like that. Just looked like a turtle shell. Like if you took 2 turtle shells and put them together, that's what it looked like. And it was very, I don't know, it just, it looked weathered, I guess. So at that point, we're now between 3 objects. We had the craft in the field here, we had the white sphere to the left, and the orange one to the right. And our car was pretty much in the middle of all 3 objects. And so we started to feel odd. The barometric pressure seemed to change. That's the,
I'm trying to find it.
okay. So the best way to describe what we went through was, it sounded like stones tapping the underside of our car. So it had like a tap, 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 tap like that. And I had an MRI later on, and I thought, well, that's very similar to it, but an MRI is much deeper tone. It was a much lighter tap, 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 tap. And then all of a sudden we felt like we were submerged underwater. Everything seemed to get like muted and almost like my mother even worded in Unsolved Mysteries, how it was like a tight, or a pressure, almost like we were wrapped in something. We were almost like suffocated in the way we felt. And then like when you're underwater and someone hits the pool or drops something in it or hits the side of the pool, it echoes, yet almost everything else is muted. So it was almost like we were focused on this one tone. We didn't hear a breeze. We didn't hear crickets. We didn't hear anything like that. It was simply this tapping noise underwater, a pressure, a silence, and then bang, there was this light, and that went out. Everything seemed to come back normal again. And then the next thing we know, we're no longer in the car. There's my parents. But yeah, you got a lot of imagery there. Can other people see this too, or is this just me? Or oh, I can't hear you, buddy. I'm sorry.
Everyone can see it.
Okay. So if we go, yeah, if you don't mind,
There we go.
yeah, right there. So this centerpiece right here was much fatter. And if you notice the bottom was a little more narrow, that's pretty accurate, but that centerpiece didn't protrude like that. It was flatter, but that's, the best you could do with it. But that is pretty much what we saw. And it was about 100 yards in size. And if you look at the right side of it, kind of maybe halfway between the end and the center on the right, that was all lit up, but the left side was not. But you could see the whole thing because it was like enough light. It was all putting out something, but the lion's share of the light came from the right side. And so we're looking at the right side and we're looking to the left and we realize how big this thing is. And we never saw the white sphere again. Never saw that again. Never saw the orange ball either, or the sphere. And so we're sitting there in the car looking out the windows at this thing. And again, it's tapping sound, submerged underwater. And then it was just like, bang, everything came back. It was like we could see the dashboard. Now, Ancient Aliens and the team there really thought that maybe that white sphere had come back, and that's where this light flashed in our car was from the white sphere. Now, we also saw it when it rose up, it fired like these rods of light from the sides of it. So for a moment or two, it actually looked like an ice cream cone, if to give you an idea, or Hershey's Kiss, an upside down Hershey's Kiss. But it was only for a second or two. And we don't remember ever seeing it again, but it would make sense that that's where the flash of light came from. So again, we think that maybe we were in the center of three objects communicating with each other. And that's why we felt the way we did. And then this flash, and we came to, and everything seemed normal for a second or two. You could hear, this eruption of crickets and katydids and frogs and the leaves. There was a little bit of a breeze. All of a sudden, everything seemed normal. So it would be like, again, submerged underwater. You can't hear anything. And then you're pulled out of water and you hear life again, just for a moment. And then that was the last thing I remember from being in the car. So with that, that's pretty much what took place initially. I do remember waking up, if you will, or the next thing I recall from what happened. I was sitting on something in a large, like it almost looked like an airplane hangar, and I had scooted off this thing, whatever I was sitting on, and onto my feet, and then I was grabbed like this on my left arm. It hurt, and kind of pushed forward out this door. And that's when I was in this narrow hallway, very tall. It wasn't curvy or modern looking. It was just very industrial by design. It felt harsh. I was no longer in any odd state. I mean, I was clear headed and taken down this hallway. And at the end of the hallway, there was a T. So again, it wasn't like windy hallways or anything. It was lefts and rights, and then brought into this room where I again was sitting on this table. I believe it was like a silvery white or something. And I did have one post in the middle. So later on, looking or drawing these things or what I remember, it reminded me of an autopsy table, to be honest with you, where it could spin and turn and move. And there was an apparatus in the ceiling that later lowered. And while the what I was sitting on rose, and what was above me lowered. So it was almost like I was sitting here and then they joined like that. There was a wall in front of me that looked like glass. It was bowed inward, kind of like a coffee can would be bowed. And there was an exit to the left and an exit to the right. And again, I was very uh, conscious, clear-headed, and I ran out this door and into what would be as large as an empty Walmart. So, with that said, a lot of people have said, well, were you, you were abducted. And I've said, I don't know, because I don't know where I was. And the room I was in and what I was seeing, if you take the first area that I was in, which is like large as an airplane hangar, and then into the hallway, and then into this other room, and then ran out into this other area that was as large as a Walmart, it was 3 or 4 times larger than what we saw. And because of all the everything that was happening back then with the space race and Command Aerospace and Pratt and Whitney and Sikorsky and you know Sprague Electric that made the Goodwill message, there was a lot of money being put into the space race and that kind of thing. So, and even NASA was in Boston at the time. And so to kind of make sense of all this, we're like, well, maybe we were at the wrong place at the wrong time. There's a joint thing happening here. What we saw was off-world, but who extracted us from the car might have been government. We still don't know. But I know that the state knew something more than they were telling us, because they wouldn't have gone as far as they did to induct it. So I think something was happening that was a joint effort. So with that, I was brought back into the room from that area that was just a big open area. And I was put back on this table, and I was to lay down, and everything that took place, anyone that was there, these individuals that looked somewhat human to me, didn't look that much different, were to my left. And then this, where I was sitting, rose, this apparatus lowered, and I don't remember ever being caught, like I couldn't move, but I was basically naked, and there were these packs being put on my body from the left side, which looked like large raisins to me. And maybe the size of your fist. And they adhered to my skin. And I then remember a bang to the head, and then I'm back in the room, where that area that looked like an airplane hangar, which is where this whole thing started. And then for a moment or two, I remember that like just like a second of it. I just remember the room again. And then the next thing I remember, I'm coming to in downtown Sheffield. Now, in between that time, my grandmother and mother were reversed in the car. When they came to, if you will, my grandmother was now in the driver's seat, and my mother was in the passenger seat. Yet it was my mother that had been driving that car to begin with. So we say to ourselves, was that human error? Why would that happen? Secondly, the ignition in the car was running when this took place. My mother never shut the car off. It was dark. We were heading home. We only pulled over for a moment, put it in park. The car was running. But when my grandmother found herself in the driver's seat, I was still out at this time. She said she had to start the car. So the ignition was off, the lights were off, and they were reversed. So you got to ask yourself, did someone walk down the road, reach in and no one was there and turn it off? Or again, did this have more of a human element to it than we initially thought? So when we got back to Sheffield, my grandmother was the only one awake. She tried to get my mother to come to. She wouldn't respond. My brother's head was on my leg, and she drove past past the entrance to Sheffield, and pulled in front of Silks, which is still there to this day as well. And oddly enough, my grandmother never really drove. I mean, she had her driver's license, but she hadn't driven in years. Back in the 60s, a lot of people didn't drive. So she really didn't, And so for her to turn that station wagon around and go back to town for help was not easy for her, especially on that little dirt road. And so she walks in, she gets out of the car and starts walking into the Silks for help, but she's kind of walking aimlessly kind of thing. And when she got out, the door slammed, and that's when I came to, and I kind of woke up, I guess, And then again, it wasn't like a lot of people say, like, we had experiences in the 66 and 67, but it was like instantly. We came out of this at different times. We came out of this like all within about 3 or 4 minutes of each other. My brother being the last one, but he was also the smallest. So what happened? It was just very different than a lot of other experiences that I talked to people about. It was very different. And it had a very military type of feel to it. If you were to go in that direction, it did. And so when she came out of the car going in for help, she was still kind of walking aimlessly or droggy. And I got out of the car and started, Nana, because my brother's head was on my leg. My mom's passed out. I'm scared at this point. So I'm like, Nana, I'm trying to run to get her. And so I go into Silks with her while she's going to try to, get the police or something. And she walked right by the clerk. She went right to the back of the store where they had bikes and strollers and food or whatever. And it was like she went there for a reason, but didn't know once she got inside, she didn't know what to say or do. And I'm holding her hand, I'm pulling her, and never said anything on the way out. There was a conversation. No one showed up. I don't think she ever asked for help because she didn't know what to ask for help for. But I think if we had, we would have realized that the police were already notified that something was happening in Sheffield, but we didn't know it at that point. And so with that, we went home, and the next day, opened up the restaurant like we normally did, and that's when we found that so many other people had an experience that night, and so that's you know uh, what I remember from it. It was a really messed up night, but anyway, I don't really remember being hurt. There was one point where it felt like it was boiling hot water running through my body, just the upper shoulders and arms. And I remember hearing my mom or grandmother calling for me. Um, there was I didn't hear other voices. I think they were my mother, grandmother. And my brother ended up having marks in his body. And, so, it was a lot to deal with, because the next morning too, there was it came over the radio, these people that had called into the police department, and Tom J had recorded some of these calls the night before and replayed them the next morning. And so we're sitting in the Village Green in Sheffield, at the bar top, and we had a jukebox in there too. But in the morning we listened to the radio. It was like over the grill, and sure enough, we hear all these calls from people the night before. And so because of 67, which also made the papers, people were saying to my mom, "I'm sorry, we didn't believe you," that kind of thing. And so it was kind of um, a reckoning, and my mom remembers, certain things. My grandmother remembers certain things. My brother too. My brother had a club foot. He had a brace on his leg, and he remembers attention being given to his leg. Um, you know, my brother remembers seeing what I did. My mother and grandmother don't remember that part where these two pieces met, that room. But my grandmother remembers something very personal to her, you know. You know what I mean, I guess, and so in some respects, I think my mom was the one who doesn't talk about it as much as anyone else, although she did do Unsolved Mysteries because it was important. Um, so I don't remember seeing, anything really odd in the room that looked like an airplane hangar. I do remember seeing what looked like an insect, an ant, if you will, is the best way for me to describe it afterwards. I was like, how do I picture what we saw? And I think you got a picture of that. I think I sent that to you. Um, it really looked like an ant.
Let me try to find that as well. Is it possible to take a few audience questions?
Yeah,
while I
of
go and look
course.
at that?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
So first question, let me see. Let's see. Did your family members recall similar events recalled?
Yeah.
That
Yeah,
everything is all,
well, my grandmother again remembered like a very personal type of examination.
was it like also similar rooms? Was it the same room that you described?
No, they do not remember that room where I was. That room that I was in had a glass wall to it. They don't remember anything like that. Um, they, my grandmother was examined in a table type of thing that was very similar to what I went through. My mother doesn't remember anything of that nature. She just remembers, being somewhere else. My mom mostly remembers the feeling in the car, what happened, being somewhere else, not knowing where she was, which is what scared her because she had no idea what happened or where she was, and was calling for us. So my mother was calling out. My grandmother remembers a personal examination. My brother and I both remember pretty much the same thing with these tables and this ant figure, if you will. Now, to give you an idea what that thing looked like, when I was asked to describe it way back when, I remember as a kid, you have references, right? The turtle shell, the head looked like a football to me, and and people, the eyes on the corner like a hammerhead shark. No, it was like on the front of the football. It had eyes kind of on the side, and it had a very thin, like mushroom type body, skin color, and it was squatting, and it was actually facing a wall. So it would be like, oh, but like it was facing like this far from a wall, just staring at this wall when I saw it, as if there was something in that wall that it was focused on. And it just turned its head. There were two. There was a larger one and one of it looked, I don't know, could have been the same size. One was squatting maybe more than the other, but there were two. And the head, why I say it looks like an ant, that if you've ever seen the head of a red fire ant, how it's somewhat translucent, it looked like that. It wasn't like a solid skin type thing. It actually looked like you could see through it a little bit, just like the head of a fire ant. So that's where I started with that. I'm like, okay, this is what it looked like. Did it have eyes in the front? No, it was kind of on the sides, which is interesting too, because on the front you would think, okay, it's a man eater, right? That's a predator, but on the side you're really not. And people say to me, oh, it was it was probably you know, something we all see, these type of insect type creatures, if you will. But everything that I've seen, and we're gone 50 years now, I've never seen anyone else describe what we saw. So again, I asked myself, I was young, maybe it wasn't quite as terrifying as I remember it to be. Maybe I was more scared than I thought. But when we put this together, my brother and I, we remember the legs look like bamboo sticks. So we were in Florida, and bamboo used to remind us of the legs of this thing. And my son played football, and even to this day, he holds a football, and my brother and I are looking at it, and for whatever reason, it bothers us. And so the head looked like a football, it was reddish clear, the body was mushroom colored, and the legs looked like bamboo. And that's what this thing looked like. And so we ask ourselves, was it robotic? Was it uncanny valley? Was it real? Was it breathing? I don't know. But I know that it was intelligent, and never forget it.
Another question, were you afraid during the experience or in awe when it was occurring?
The I think the entire night, well, it was very confusing, and I don't remember really being hurt except feeling that like bubbling hot water going through my arms and my upper body and the back area here. I would say that, yeah, I was scared, but I would come and go a little bit. Every now and then I'd feel like placid, just kind of going along with whatever this was and not fighting it, and then it would kind of wear off, and then I'd run. So whatever this was, it came and went. I wasn't always feeling the same, which is why I think I remember parts more than others. So I've made this reference before, like if you're watching a horror flick and someone bangs a window or a branch hits it or whatever, you're like, whoa, you're spooked. It doesn't really mean it was meant to scare you, but you can't help the way you feel. And so in a lot of ways, I think that's how it was for me. I mean, I had no idea if I was even going to see tomorrow. I didn't know if I was going to get killed. I didn't know where I was. I didn't know what was happening. I couldn't find my parents. I hear her voices. I try to run out the door. My brother was kind of in the same situation, although I didn't see him. Um, we felt isolated and left alone, and you see something that, is, more bothering than some Halloween costume, right? And then you're got packets put on your body, and you're like, it was surreal. And, and, you know, then all of a sudden, boom, I'm calm and I'm letting it happen. And I don't know why. Um, so that's kind of what it was like.
Do you remember their hands, their feet, any sort of clothing, any sort of writing or markings on the walls, or any sort of
Yeah, I
object?
actually do remember markings on the floor. There were like gray lines marking it. So when I ran out that door, and it was this large open area. And by the way, to give you an idea what this looked like, if you took a big circle, this like I said before, like the size of a friggin' Walmart or Target or a big department store, and had it as a circle, and then you took the letter Y, right, and you placed it in the middle of it. So you had the two top of the Y on one end and this bottom of the Y on the other. That's how the hallways looked that intersected this large circle. So I came out right at the side of one of these top parts of the Y, which were narrow, more narrow. Maybe it was as wide as a 2-lane road. And then on the left side, it was about as large as a 4-lane road, like a highway. So I think later on, we're trying to make sense of where we were, right? So we're thinking, well, maybe this was a way to control traffic. A lot of people coming and going, where maybe they're coming in from one area. Some are going this way, some are going this way, and that's why the halls on the top were thinner or less, half the size of what was on the other side of it. But so my mother and grandmother were at the top part of the Y. I was at the bottom part of the Y, and that I know. And so why this big area? What was coming and going through this area? And so there was all this stuff, going on in my head. But again, I'm 9 years old. I'm almost 10, but I had no friggin' idea what was going on. You know,
Did you try to attempt to communicate verbally, or did they try to contact you or try to calm you down, maybe telepathically? Did you get any sort of sense of that?
I think at one point, and I'm not saying I've never said these were grays, so they look very human to me. Smaller, I guess if you were to really label it, more like a hybrid uh, human. No hair, um, smaller. They weren't much bigger than me. I mean, I don't remember anything, governmental 280-pound, Hulk Hogan type of thing. No, I just I was coming in and out of whatever this was, and those around me were small, not much bigger than me. And I think they understood what I was going through. I don't think I understood anything from them, but I came away with an awful lot of very strong feelings. Like I've always said, that Earth is our galaxy's arc. There's been what, 6 or 7 global extinctions, and yet we have 7 or 8 million species here. And we all know that it couldn't be one male, one female, because they would have died off because it would inbred. And so I have this feeling like this knowing that Earth is like a safe haven. A lot of people are like, oh no, they're going to take over all this. No, I don't think that at all. I think Earth is, like I said, our galaxy's arc. It's here to preserve life, and why water is so important, and why our case went to the UN in support of the Hudson River Valley sightings in New York, also in support of Cash and Landerman in Texas, because of the way our car was affected and the feeling and what happened with our vehicle. And so those are the 2 cases that went to the UN in support of during the General Assembly 33-426 with our attorney, Robert Bletchman, who was from Manchester, Connecticut, by the way, and was a friend of my father's. And he was the one who put the symposium together with Mohammed Rabidin, who at the time was the president of the Parapsychology Society at the UN. And, Stanton Friedman was there, Linda Morton Howe was there was a lot of people there. And, our case wasn't a front runner by any means, but the Robert Bletchman wanted to mention our case because of what was happening in the Hudson River stuff. It was also over water and a stone throw away. And so what was happening in Housatonic, on the Housatonic River, was that now part of what was happening in the Hudson? Was there a connection there? And of course, my father lost his life, on the anniversary of that date after talking about writing a book. So was I scared? Yeah. Was I hurt? Not really. It woke me up. My mother had said to me later on, "What do you want for your birthday?" And I told her a camera. So if I ever saw this again, I wanted to get grab a photo of it. And that became kind of a career for me for a while. So, some good came from it. I'm not, horrified over it, but I certainly feel differently and think differently now than I would have if I wasn't part of this, if this hadn't happened.
You weren't the only one that was also taken, right, Tom? In
No.
the town.
Well, like Melanie Kirchdorfer, who I have a lot of respect for, what happened with her was around the same time. She was gone the same time I was. Her family had gone home, and Melanie, next morning found herself on the beach at Lake Mansfield and had walked home. Her parents actually left her there. Left when this happened with her, so she had to walk home herself. And some people, say to her, why'd you, how'd you walk home? Well, she lived right near the lake. But Melanie also used to come in our diner when she was young, and she had this thing for like grilled cheese sandwiches with onions. And she would come in, and my mom would whip that up, and she'd brown bag it and, leave with her boyfriend at the time. She was older than me. And another thing too, our diner was very popular because it was the only spot around where you could really listen to music. We had the jukebox, and it's not like we had PLR coming in, a good strong signal at the time either. So, if you wanted to listen to music, my mom would give the kids, quarters and drop them in a jukebox, and she'd take these French fries and deep fry them in bacon fat and give the kids fries until their parents could come pick them up. Because, but also, if you know Sheffield, it's not like the school buses just went to everybody's house, right? I mean, there was a lot of farms there. So rather than the mothers leaving their kids, at the school bus or waiting with them, they just drop them off at our diner and they'd walk to school together. So again, Kevin Titus and Melanie and many others, Galata, who was on Unsolved Mysteries, his father was the chief of police. They were all part of our diner as children, as 9 and 10-year-olds. But they all grew up to have good positions, and they remember what happened, and they all spoke out about, yeah, this took place. And that's kind of how our case ended up getting inducted. So, do you have any more questions or anything from the, okay.
Can you talk a little bit more about the idea of Earth as a safe haven?
Yeah, so I look at, or I feel this. I feel like I know it, right? So, again, we've had, depending on who you ask or Wikipedia, whatever, let's just say a half dozen global extinctions. So basically everything was wiped off the face of the earth except for what 10 or 15% of life. And yet here we are in 2022, and depending on where you go and look at the numbers, there's at least 6 to 8 million species here today. Now, it's not as if polar bears, finally found their way to, a colder climate, right? They would have probably had to have been there to begin with, or they would have died. They're not going to last in, in New Mexico, right? So, everything seems to be very well planned. There's, we have freshwater, saltwater, brackish water. Our Earth rotates on a unique axis, so it can house millions of species at the same time who require a different type of climate, rainforest, jungle, you name it. And it just seems to me that because of the amount of animals or species we have here today, that they're not just, all of a sudden, whoa, a new species. They're coming here. They're being brought here. And I believe that, I strongly believe that, this is a safe haven for life to be preserved. So either, I'll give you an idea of this too. Think about this. The sun's not going to last forever. Eventually, Earth is going to be extinct. If we don't blow ourselves up, or it gets hit by an asteroid, or the moon shifts and there's tidal, eventually life on Earth is going to be gone. And so the Elon Musks of the world and others, Bigelow and those, they're going to find a way to go elsewhere. And they're going to bring cattle. They're going to bring vegetables. They're going to bring food, just like exactly what happened with Earth. And that's what Earth is. Earth was they go, wow, it's got water. It's got everything. Look at it this way too. Our legs hurt when you get older. Our knees hurt. We get varicose veins. We're sore because our bodies are not used to that gravitational pull. So wherever we're from, and we got in our ears, we got gills. So, we weren't meant to be the way we're living now. So there was a shift. I also think that they're just like those breeds of horses, there's breeds of dogs that, you want a good pit bull. Let's use that for an example. You're going to look for one with a good personality. You're going to stick to that line. You want a racehorse. You're not going to just grab any horse and hope that it's a winner. You're going to follow that line. And that is what's happening, I think, with abductions and family experiences and those who have multiple experiences. There's something about you. It's not just junk DNA in our systems, right? So there's a reason for it. There's something in there as well. But then again, also look at this. You've got, we've got these brains, right, that are obviously toned down. So if not, okay, let me give you start over. We can actually control a robotic arm by thought, right? We all know that by now. At one point in 2013 or 14, someone brought over this board and put it on my kitchen table. And it was like an air hockey table with the air coming out of the bottom of it. And there was these goalposts and things along the top of it. And this was from a testing center in Knoxville, Tennessee. And they put this headset on my head and they said, well, it was to amplify my brain waves. And so they said, can you move this ping pong ball over this table? And I couldn't do it at first. And at one point, this other girl, my attorney's daughter, tried it and she was able to do it. She was young. It was going all over the place, going through goalposts, circles. She was amazing with this thing. And like, how'd you do that? I just asked it to go. And so I put the headset back on and I'm thinking to myself, move, right? And I couldn't get this little ball just stuck there. But then I let go, relaxed, and said, go through the post in my head. And it did. So I was able to move this ball all over this table at will. It took a little while sometimes to get to go, but I could do it. And so knowing that if we could amplify our brainwaves, and even now we can move robotic arms, if we were able to use 50 or 60 or 70% of our brain, I could probably stand next to you and tell you what your credit card numbers were, right? And so we're not ready for that yet. But I do believe that there are species among us that have that ability. It's just not all of us. My body temperature runs at 97.1, like a lot of other people out there. It's O negative. My blood type's O negative, which, by the way, was also the only blood type tracked by the U.S. government in the 60s because it was a universal donor for Vietnam. And we had all this military and, in our area and manufacturing facilities being funded by the government. So all this came into play when they finally inducted it. So let me ask you this, why would our blood type govern our body temperature? Change it by 2 degrees. Makes no sense. So we are a breed within a breed, a species within a species. So if you take that and you realize that we're not, it wasn't like Adam and Eve did this, right? We all would have had the same blood type, right? If 2 people populated the planet, which that's a busy family, there's no way that we would have all these different variances, and the O negative blood group has no tie to the monkey. We don't know where it comes from. So I believe the O negative blood group is the original blood of man. It was unmutated. We mutated from that. And so my body temperature, I can go and be in Florida with a jacket and the heat doesn't bother me. But it drops below 45 degrees. This is why I left Connecticut in the first place. I can't take the cold. But then friends of mine with normal body temperature, they're affected differently by weather and temperatures. So we're not all the same. We're a different species. There's different species within a species. So that's
Can't even imagine that. I always, I'm always hotter. I'm always
Are
like
you?
98. I'm like 98, 99 all the time.
There you go. So, right? That doesn't make sense. So when I was young and I was get like the flu or something, I had the chapped lips and I couldn't get in my car door, and I'm going to the doctor because it's all icy and I'm not feeling good. I'd go in, but 99, 99 degrees. Oh, you're fine. I'm not fine. I'm 2 points below that normally. I have a temperature and I couldn't get an antibiotic for it. But anyway, that's my feeling on that. Um, so yeah, how much time do I got? Oh, wow. Okay. So I haven't even Liz hasn't even said hello yet.
Yeah, let's introduce Elizabeth,
Yeah,
and
I'm sorry,
she
rambling
sent me
here.
some pictures, and maybe we can share those photographs as well as we move on.
Oh, you want me?
So
Wait
yeah,
a
go
minute.
ahead. Yeah, introduce
Oh, I'm
Elizabeth.
sorry.
That's okay.
Okay, so again, Elizabeth Michael, she has been a huge supporter of the Berkshires UFO case, and I'll give you an example why. Roswell is that Roswell is it, right? And so with that, being on our case has the amount of the testimony and the papers and the documents and the paper trail that it has, there was a lot of interest in our case. And so she takes an interest in the Berkshire's UFO case, which primarily is my family's incident, but there's an awful lot of people that were also part of it. So originally it was just the Reed family incident, I think is when it was originally investigated. And because of the credibility behind it, it's gotten the attention of a lot of people in Roswell. So, Liz?
So it's particularly interesting to us is that most people know we have had our own incident. And so, and we are kind of known as the UFO capital of the world. And we have one of the largest UFO festivals in the United States and beyond. And we have people that come from all over. So we take a particular interest in Thom Reed's and the Reed's family incident because, first of all, the International UFO Museum does honor his family and his father, Howard Reed, in their museum, which is great. They were also very instrumental. Their research team, the International UFO Museum's research team, was very instrumental in getting involved before 2015 in those first few years to do a lot of the background research to really bring a lot of this stuff to the forefront. And on July 2nd, and there were articles before this, but on July 2nd of 2015, we actually talked about how the historical group confirms that this alien incident was actually true and historic. And so it's very important to us that we stand behind that and come together because that is something that we're known for. So we take a particular interest in the Reed family's incident for that reason. It's true. It's historically significant. We want to bring light to that. And I think most recently, within the most recent years, the government is now, coming out saying these things are true. And so there's a particular interest in not just our community, but the communities across the globe. And I guess, Thom, you could speak to this as well. How often you get, these questions, the fact that the United Nations was in support of this in a General Assembly. This happened way back September 1st, 1969, correct?
Yeah.
Yes.
And it went before the UN in, I think, 1992. Now, do you have the actual article?
I do. Here's the article. Here's Tom's. Here's his mug right there.
Now
I've highlighted some things that were of particular interest because
that's the Roswell Daily Record.
it is. Oh yes, Roswell let me see if I can get the masthead up there. Can you guys see the masthead? Yep, Roswell Daily Record. You know, it was, this is volume 124, number 157, July 2nd, 2015. It actually was on a Thursday. So, and it jumps onto the inside page from page 1. So we've written, as I said, that the Roswell Daily Record has written multiple stories about the Reed family incident, and it is of particular interest to us. So what I do want to do is I want Thom to just kind of explain a couple of things for us, because he does have more of the knowledge, and I don't want to say something that could not be true or factual. But back when everything was going on, Howard Reed, which is Thom's father, as he stated before, he was a politician, he was an attorney, he was very well respected. Senator Christopher Dodd and Governor O'Neill were personal friends of his, and also supported his campaign during this time. And what is of particular interest is that when all of this was being investigated and it went to the United Nations, the following year, on the actual anniversary, as Thom had mentioned, Mr. Reed lost his life, but it wasn't, through.
It wasn't actually the following year.
Right.
It was the anniversary,
Oh,
wasn't
the
it?
anniversary of that, yes.
Yeah. But what I would like to do, since you have that section highlighted, I'd like maybe we don't have much time left. Could you tell why that article was even written? Wasn't it interview the Historical Society and why they inducted it, and the details of why that article is so important?
Right. It was very important because there was a letter written on February 6th by Debbie Opperman, and she was the director at the time of the Great Barrington Historical Society, and she Historical Society Museum, and she wrote about that. And because of that, and all of the interest that was transpiring here at the Research Center with the International UFO Museum, we wanted to highlight that, and it was important because they were very.
Write about? What was it she wrote about?
Oh, she wrote about.
This is your reporter. Your reporter.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. So our reporter, the reporter at the time was Kathy, and I'm trying to.
It doesn't matter. We're running out of time.
Anyway,
so.
She wrote about the fact that this particular incident was true, and it was historically significant because the Historical Society and Deborah Opperman actually wrote and just explained how there were many witnesses, that this event was true and significant, as Thom had talked about. With
Can I jump in here, because we're missing a point that's really
yeah,
important.
sorry.
Yep. Debbie Opperman was interviewed by your reporters because it had just gotten inducted, and your reporter was interested in it because of how it got inducted. And I think there's a quote there from her that it was our diner, that because our diner had altered the natural progression of the community, that's how they got it passed. And Roswell's reporter was interested in that, as to why didn't the Roswell incident become looked at as historically true, because that altered the natural progression of the community. So in that article, if you can find it, she actually states, you got it? Okay, that's important, I think, because it wasn't the Reed family that really got this inducted. It was our fact that our diner, because of so many people that saw it and spoke out, that our diner actually had divided the community. Some thought it was nonsense, some were part of it. And because there were the fights and the police reports and everything, our diner had changed the community forever. And I think it's in there.
It is, and that was because there were two prior incidents that your family had experienced, one in 1966 and another one in 1967. So Debbie Opperman actually, in a quote, it says, historians or a township to officially induct a historical event, and for it to be considered true history, it must have had a life-changing impact on the area in one way or another, whether the impact was positive or negative. The second part of that is, to this day, according to the Historical Society, people in Sheffield and Great Barrington locals recall and mention the historical encounter, and it is discussed frequently. What I want to add to that is that Tom J, as Tom had mentioned, he is the gentleman that was working for WSBS, correct?
Yeah.
And so he was an avid ham radio
Operator.
and it was just basically a hobby, but there were many people in the area that actually did that. And when he got home that evening,
That's right.
that's where he heard all of the chatter, which I wanted to explain, because it wasn't that he just went back to work because he wanted to help out. He was hearing all of this chatter on the radio, and he's called his wife over and said, hey, keep a hold of this. I'm going to call the sheriff and find out what's going on, which he did. And the sheriff was getting lots of calls from the area. So in order to assist the sheriff's department at that time, he went back into work, took everything off of, the reel-to-reel, and opened up the radio waves so that people could call in and talk about what was going on, so that they could have a track of what was happening at the time. And that's really important, because for us at in Roswell, we kind of had the same thing. We had the Roswell Daily Record that was actually reporting that for us. In Great Barrington, it was WSBS. So those two things are very important to us, because you have two news sources that are very vital in the area. Radio was a very big, the WSBS was what everybody went to for news. In our area, it was the Roswell Daily Record. So those two things, that connection for us is really important. And that's why we really back it. Not only that it's true, but there are significant factors in that area that really report to the fact that it was true and it happened. And there was a lot of people that saw it, not just one or two or three. I mean, it was going through a wide range of people, even as far as Egremont, where a lot of golfers that were there from the New York area visiting during that time had actually called in to report it. Tom, anything you want to add to that?
No, I mean, I actually, kind of respect that whole article, because it was a very in-depth interview, because of, Roswell knew the questions to ask. It's not like a local reporter from Great Barrington or Sheffield just said, I'm going to, speak to Debbie. There was a lot of in-depth questions in that. And so for me, that was an important article, because it's the only article I've read where Debbie actually states that it was the diner that our family had. And so I can add to that too. I remember that when they were voting on whether or not this was going to get inducted or not, they had asked, would this stand up in a court of law? And you had the radio archives, you had all these witnesses that were judges and now bankers today, and past polygraph tests and everything. So it would actually hold up in a court of law. And then the question was, well, what did they really see? And because no one really knows what we encountered. I mean, we kind of know what we encountered, but back then, before all this disclosure, if you will, that was coming out, Elizondo and all that, something definitely happened, but you couldn't really pinpoint it. So they said, well, the family's diner altered the natural progression of the community, and because it had an impact or divided,
Right.
that it was they could rule on it that way. Just like she said to me, just like Billy the Kid altered the railroad. That's why he's famous, because he changed had an impact on the community and actually altered the community. And so that was how it got inducted. So that was the way they got it inducted. So with that, I decided to open this park in town, and follow the message at my mother's diner. What the point of that was to, like a safe haven for people too. Like they don't have to feel like they're outcast anymore. It was a judgment-free diner, and this is a judgment-free park, and it's really for everybody else. So that was the idea behind the park. And by the way, I don't know if you know this or not, but BB King's daughter now sponsors our park, and Tyrone Vaughn, the nephew of Steve Ray Vaughan. History Channel's Ancient Aliens, Mike Barr, Travis Walton, Ben Hansen just filmed there. And so the park is growing. We do have a problem keeping it mowed. So if anybody out there has a rider, we really appreciate it. Yeah, so that's where we are with that. So do you have any more questions or anything? I mean, I know we're probably running over.
No, not right now. I would say, yeah, we're running a little bit over. We would need to maybe wrap it up. I know we're having such a great conversation and everything, and we could keep going for another 40 minutes to an hour, but we really do need to kind of close things down and prepare for the Michael Schratt talk at 3 p.m. So yeah, if anyone has another quick question for our guests, Thom Reed or Elizabeth Michael, please do so. Just put it in the chat right now before we wrap things up. Just know that 3 p.m. we do have retrievals of the third kind with Michael Schratt, who is a really, really awesome presenter. And I did let him know, Tom, about the UFO Expo in
yeah,
Roswell,
yeah.
and he's real interested. And he lives in Santa Barbara, so it's no problem, going from Santa Barbara to Roswell.
Hey, if you can they still see me, or because I can't see the room or anything?
Yeah, they can still see you.
All right, so I just thought I'd show you. So this is actually the original citation that's sealed by a circuit court judge in a 30th district court in the bottom. That is the actual letter from the governor. Now, a few people had said once, but oh, it was rescinded and all that kind of stuff. No, it wasn't. The original one didn't have an actual date in it, and so the governor of Massachusetts reissued it. And this is the actual induction letter from the Historical Society, which I think is what triggered the Roswell Daily Record to interview Debbie Opperman about it. And you can pretty much, see what it says. And again, that's sealed by a judge in a 30th district court. Now, the reason it got sealed is that, let's hypothetically say that Governor, Baker didn't wanted to backpedal it because it was killing his opportunity of being reelected or something. He can't now, being that it went through a court system to be sealed. He would actually have to present his reasons to a judge in court as to why he would want to rescind that. So this is actually the first case in the United States to be deemed historically true. And that's not going to change. There's actually 4 letters that are sealed by Judge Titus. So
we have one more question from Peter. Yeah. Peter asks, have you had any more events since 1969?
Yeah, well, my brother did. He was part of the Kokomo boom in Indiana. You can look that up. It's with a K, Kokomo boom. My brother was coming back from a movie and saw something, and this was, I think, 2009 maybe, and was a witness to it and gave testimony, and that actually got us on. Oh my God, it was in Indianapolis Monthly Magazine, and it was called "Matt Reed is Alienated," and it was like a 10 to 12 page article. I mean, it was massive, and that's one of the reasons that we heard from Massachusetts, because there was actually talk of having my brother be part of the Indiana, UFO wave. And so I think that, Massachusetts was like, wait a minute, this actually started here. I wasn't part of that by any means. He was with a buddy of his, but, who else was involved in that too was Debbie Jordan Cobble, who the book Intruders was written about by Bud Hopkins. She was actually talking to my brother the following day. So she knows all about it too. And by the way, I'll just mention this. So speaking of Debbie Jordan Cobble, some of you may know that her house got hit by a tornado back in 2013 or 14. And I had just left her house. We were sitting on the sofa talking, and we left. I was with Yvonne Smith, and we were heading back to my house. She was actually there to speak to Matthew about this Kokomo boom thing. And we hadn't gotten maybe an hour down the road when that tornado took out her house. And she was actually trapped in the bathroom when it hit. And so that was devastating. That, of course, made, news as well. But so anyway, yeah. So if I'm taking up too much of your time, I apologize. we can, I guess, move on, or if you have any
Yeah,
images you
no,
want to
it's,
show,
no,
or
it's great, but that kind of goes back to Paul and Ben Eno's radio show on Sunday with Peter Robbins, who was Bud Hopkins' assistant, who says
Mhm.
that a lot of these off-world experience, abduction cases are repeat, and it deals with families, not just
Yeah.
individuals. So that's something that he has seen throughout
Yeah.
his case research. And
Well, yeah. Well, my mother had her first sighting in 1954. And so, real quick, if I can. So a lot of people, if you just focus on 1969, some of the way things happened might not make sense. But like I said, we were a novice to this. My mother was part of something in 1954. We started seeing stuff in the area in 1966. 1967 was something that we were part of, and not the whole family, but what really brought a lot of attention to our diner, and that's what all the feuding and that kind of thing started. And then 1969. So there was a lot going on in that area, and there still is. I mean, you can still see spears out there. You got a picture of the corn? Can you just show that real quick? I
yeah,
mean,
let me
some of
see if
the
I can do
corn
that.
grows like 15 feet in height. And I mean, there are just odd, there's crop circles that showed up in 2013, 2012 and 13, I think it was. Am I an expert on crop circles? No, but yeah, okay. Yeah, there you go. There's the corn. You know, now if her arm is probably almost as long as that corn, right? I mean, that's some big corn. And there's other pictures I have too where you can see that corn is, grows 15 to 7, somebody said 17, but that was like probably the tip of something, but a good 15 feet high. So there is still something going on out there. So, I've had people go out there with Geiger counters and all kinds of stuff, and who knows. But anyway, I thank you for having me again.
No,
And
thank you, Tom.
yeah,
Thank you, Elizabeth, for